Welcome to another episode of the Forbidden Films Podcast.
This is a podcast about the movies they won't make anymore. I'm Barry Germansky, a film producer.
And I'm Wayne Kramer, a writer and director. Today we're getting under the sheets with Lawrence Kasdan's 1981 classic reinvention of the film noir thriller Body Heat, starring newcomers to the screen at the time William Hurt and Kathleen Turner. I believe Hurt had already shot Eyewitness and Altered States, and this was his third movie, although I'm not sure if they were released in that order. But he wasn't particularly well known at that point. And this was Turner's feature film debut, having previously been on the soap The Doctors. Body Heat lives permanently in my ever-expanding top 10, and I've seen it more times than I can remember, going back to when I was 16 or having just turned 17 in South Africa. I remember sneaking out of school to the one theater in Johannesburg that didn't care if you were underage. This film was rated no one under 21, and if I'm not mistaken, was actually released without any cuts, which was one of the early loosenings of the censorship fist in the country. I was initially drawn to Body Heat by a trailer that I had seen for the film, which showed very little of the storyline, and more was about the tone of the eroticism of it, and it was showed these quick cuts with these sizzling sound effect, and I was sold on it. I knew nothing about the film. I didn't know much about the filmmaker Lawrence Kasdan, other than his involvement with writing Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Empire Strikes Back. So I loved this movie. I was enthralled with how edgy and erotic it was, but also how classic it was in structure, going back to the old film noirs. And I guess we've got a lot to talk about.
Oh, definitely. And I share your enthusiasm for the film. I want to give a shout out to Lawrence Kasdan and just briefly explain my appreciation of him. He's one of my favorite screenwriters, and I also think he's a great director too. And I think that as both a screenwriter and a director, he's incredibly versatile. So we're talking about a guy who wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark and Body Heat, and they were both released the same year. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of my absolute favorite films of all time. I think it's one of the most imaginative and transcendent revenge fantasies in the medium's history, especially when it comes to the melting Nazis scene. I also love Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I think they're two great streamlined space operas. They're worthy of Edgar Rice Burroughs, who's one of my favorite pulp fiction writers. And I love The Big Chill, which I think is a well-acted jukebox drama, I guess you could call it. The soundtrack is spectacular. Every song on the soundtrack, to me at least, amounts to inexhaustible bliss. The 60s are my favorite decade for popular music. And I also love, among other films that he's associated with, Dreamcatcher. I think Dreamcatcher is a vastly underrated sci-fi horror film, and it's one of the more gruesome creature features of this century so far. So that's just an overview of what I think about Lawrence Kasdan.
Yeah, I love him as a filmmaker too. I was a big fan of The Big Chill when it came out, and have revisited The Big Chill many times. I also love The Accidental Tourist, which has a great John Williams score. And
great performances.
Yeah, Kasdan has reunited with William Hurt in that one, and Gina Davis, right?
Yes, she won Best Supporting Actress actually for that.
Yeah, and it is a movie I need to watch again. I keep thinking about it, and I feel like that's a movie that as you mature, you're going to appreciate it more.
Yeah, and it's incredible that he alternates between these relatively serious adult dramas and then these sci-fi adventure films or action adventure films. It's quite remarkable.
He's definitely got a taste for quality commercialism, I guess is a way to put it. What's very interesting to me is his instincts for when he wanted to direct his first feature, that he went to film noir and he went to Body Heat. And a lot of people compare Body Heat to Double Indemnity. They think that's probably the biggest influence on it.
I'm one of them.
But you know, I watched Double Indemnity a couple of weeks ago, and I have to say, firstly, I think Body Heat is a much better film, in my opinion. And it's not just because of the updated sexuality. I just find the plot mechanisms and the character of Matty Walker to be more overtly seductive and predatory, and not as, even though she is a stone cold sociopath, I guess, she doesn't come across as chilly as Barbara Stanwyck in Double
Well, I
Indemnity.
prefer Kathleen Turner as an actress in general to Barbara Stanwyck, even though I do like Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity and a number of other films. So, yeah, I agree that, well,
And I
maybe I don't
find,
agree because I don't know what you think about Kathleen Turner in this film specifically, but
oh no,
I think she's a great femme fatale.
I think she is the femme fatale. I don't know if I think there's been a more knockout performance of a modern day femme fatale as Kathleen Turner. I might add Ellen Barkin in Sea of Love, but Ellen Barkin's character in Sea of Love isn't really a manipulative sociopathic character. She, in a way, I hope I'm not spoiling the movie, turns out to be a victim. But Kathleen Turner gives a very unique performance, and that's also a very physical performance on her part, because Kathleen Turner uses her sexuality as a weapon in this movie. And
Yes.
I'm not even sure if Barbara Stanwyck went to that degree, because honestly, Barbara Stanwyck was a great actress, but I don't think she's anywhere near as sexy as Kathleen Turner in this movie.
No, she's Barbara Stanwyck's performance in Double Indemnity has always struck me as very bizarre. It's overtly artificial, the performance. I mean, even her look, right? She's supposed to radiate artifice, I guess. And by the way, I love Double Indemnity. I think it's a masterpiece. But if we're just talking about specifically which femme fatale do I prefer Kathleen Turner's femme fatale in Body Heat. But yeah, definitely Barbara Stanwyck's performance in Double Indemnity does not exude
And and
sensuality the same way that Kathleen Turner's performance
and
does.
William Hurt as Ned Racine is so much more likable than Fred McMurray. I
Well,
think
my
let's not.
favorite character in Double Indemnity is Edward G.
Oh
Robinson's
yeah, of
character.
course. And he is a great character. And he is the
Yeah.
most, I mean, he is the most sympathetic character in that movie.
It's just such
And
a great performance, one of the great fast-talking performances.
yeah, and a man who doesn't lose his principles, and even though he likes Fred McMurray's character, is still willing to take him down in the end.
Yes.
But let's go back to William Hurt, because I don't think William Hurt gets enough credit for playing Ned Racine in Body Heat. The conversation usually focuses on Kathleen Turner, which I want to come back to. But William Hurt is so perfect in this movie. You know, he plays his looks down a little bit, but he's still a very handsome man. But he's got a twinkle in his eye. He's got this mischievous kind of on the make quality that I love about him. He's kind of a lightweight as a lawyer, which is what the plot turns on as well. But he's quick with a quip or a comeback. And the combination of Hurt and Turner knocking out Lawrence Kasdan's phenomenal dialogue that still stands the test of time, and I think is some of the best written film dialogue, most memorable film dialogue ever written. They're just fantastic delivering it. And there are so many great lines in Body Heat, which I don't think Double Indemnity has. I don't think Double Indemnity has the playfulness of Body Heat, because I would say the first act and a half of Body Heat is very playful, and there's a lot of flirtatious behavior going on and eroticism, which obviously Billy Wilder couldn't do at the time of Double Indemnity. So it's all suggested in that film. But that was one of the great gifts Lawrence Kasdan was given or gave to himself, is to take the template of something like Double Indemnity and finally make good on the sexuality or the seductiveness of a film like that for a modern audience, which was a 1981 audience, which I'll contend was a more daring or open-minded audience by far than the audiences we have today, and their toleration for sexuality, or what you would assume is
Yes.
the male gaze, a term that I just have very little time for. And if somebody starts talking to me about the male gaze as being a problem in a film, I just tune out, because I go, you're not a serious person to me in terms of
Because everyone
processing
knows the
film.
first thing that someone thinks about when they go to watch a movie is this a representation of the male gaze, right? That's the first thing that someone is
But
going to be
it's
thinking.
become the catchphrase for anything that
No, I know it's just resentful academics who think that way.
I think so. I think so. And I have no problem with women directors or even male directors chasing the female gaze, whatever that may be. I mean, it's what, putting the camera a little bit further back. So you're not attributing.
But is it natural for anyone who isn't frustrated academic of one kind or another to watch a movie and the first thing they're thinking about is any sort of gaze? You know what
No,
I'm
it's
saying? Like whether it's a
ridiculous.
female gaze, male gaze, anything. Who like that shouldn't be the first thing you're thinking
But
about.
it's ridiculous because you're also saying, I want you as a male filmmaker to not think like a man. And if you're making, in particular, a sexy movie like Body Heat, I want you to make it like a woman. which is which is why most of these movies these days are only being made by women directors because they're the only ones who can get away with asking another actress to take their clothes off. Because the vibe out there now is if it's a man, you're perving on me, or the set's going to be perving on me. But with a female director, I'm going to feel a lot safer. And speaking of the movies they won't make anymore, I did read a couple of years ago, or maybe I only saw the story recently, and it was announced a couple of years ago that Kimberly Pierce was attached to do a remake of Body Heat. And I'm first of all thinking, okay, that's a terrible idea. Not Kimberly Pierce doing it, but just remaking Body Heat. But then I'm also going, okay, is that going to be the lesbian
Yeah,
version of
exactly.
it? Which is okay. You can do that, but it doesn't have to be Body Heat. It
But
doesn't
the
have to
thing
be a
is, the
remake
fact
of
that
Body
that would
Heat.
seem like it's the natural template for the remake shows how unexciting such a film would be because we're already expecting that to be the case. In other words, we've been conditioned now to expect that there's going to be the queer angle or gaze or whatever they would call it. You know what I'm saying? In other words,
Which I
any
have no
no, I
problem
have no
with.
problem with it at all, of
You
course. But
can
what I'm saying
remake
is,
body. It's
it's
just yes, it's obvious, like you
yeah,
say,
exactly. It's
but
not startling.
obvious in the way because what it's saying is the male version of this, the male gaze version of this, is not welcome. We don't want to see that movie. Is the dictate that's coming out from financiers or studios. But if it comes with a gay sensibility or a gay point of view, then that's going to be look how cool and original
But
or
when was the
female.
last time a movie was considered, let's say, controversial or startling because the characters were gay, for example? I mean, I think the last time would be something like Brokeback Mountain, maybe. Um,
I wouldn't say that necessarily because Love Lies Bleeding I thought was an excellent film with Kristen Stewart.
oh, I'm
And
not, by the way, I'm not talking about whether the movie's good or not. I'm just talking about using the fact that the characters are gay as the sort of like controversial or, enticing or
well, it's
startling
not
aspect of the
controversial.
film. Of course.
It's not controversial anymore. The heterosexual version would be
That's right.
controversial.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is a movie like Body Heat should be startling in ways that are not topical, in ways that are not political. Because this is, if we're talking about the 1981 version of Body Heat, it's an elemental film, right? It's a movie about primal instincts.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be about the movie is actually an antidote to people who decide to, as a first reaction to something, politicize it, whether it's a work of art or anything else that takes place in the world.
Well,
So,
what's
yeah.
unusual about Body Heat in, let's say, in today's world is it's a movie that's not afraid to be sexy. It's a movie that literally drips with sex in a classy way.
Yes.
Like Hurt's character Ned Racine is enthralled to Kathleen Turner, and as long as he can keep fucking her, she can take him anywhere, all the way to murder. He is open to that. The film is literally about sex. It's the power of a beautiful woman to get a man to commit murder on her behalf, and the weakness of a man like Ned, who is unable to resist her. So Maddie or Kathleen Turner uses her body as a weapon. It's always there in the dialogue right from the start. Ned says to her, maybe you shouldn't dress that way in the bar when all those men are being like staring at her or trying to hit on her, and he's just come in there. And she goes, what are you talking about? I'm just wearing a blouse and skirt. And he has like the best line in Body Heat where he responds, you shouldn't wear that body. It's all about how far a man will go for sex and how a woman who has this beauty and sexuality understands the male instinct. And there's a line also in the same scene where Matty says to Ned, "What are you doing in Pine Haven?" And he goes, "I'm no yokel. I was all the way to Miami once." She knows she's got this guy pegged, and obviously it was a setup from the start, and she heard about him and she knew he would be the perfect pawn for her in having him knock off her husband. But the whole movie functions on this sexual chemistry and these sexual vibrations that play throughout the movie, whether it's the wind chimes. The whole movie resonates sweat and heat, and
Yes.
Ned drives a red car. And there's always this in the production design and in the cinematography by Richard H. Kline, there's always this heated vibe, this using the color red or warm tones. And it's interesting because Kasdan's original draft of the script was written to be set in Belmar on the Jersey Shore in New Jersey. And I think weather necessitated them moving it to Florida. But Florida is just perfect for
Yes.
body heat because if you're in Florida, you feel the humidity. And the humidity like lives on the sweat of these characters. But apparently it was freezing cold when they made body heat. And I think they were spraying them with fake sweat.
Well, now with climate change, by the way, that might be a different story because you can go to maybe New Jersey or any number of other places. You'll end up feeling like you're in Florida.
I think it was just the
Um,
time of the year that they were doing. I think they were shooting it in the winter.
well, there you go. But the other thing I was going to say when you were talking about how this movie is about how far a man will go for sex and who he'll murder and whatever else he'll do. These are ancient concepts, right? You can look at either the Tanakh or the Old Testament in the Christian version of the Bible, or you can look at Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. You can go back as far as you want, and you're going to see a seductress tempting a man to do something he shouldn't, right? You could even interpret the story of Adam and Eve in that way.
Yep.
Right? Eve is a seductress of some kind. Certainly, it's been interpreted that way. And then, of course, there's many other biblical characters who would be essentially the
It's the story
prototype
of
of the femme
all our
fatale.
lives.
Yeah,
It's the
there you
story of
go.
all our lives. And we all just stop short of murder, I think.
So yeah, so in other words, anybody who would, let's say, criticize this movie for being in some way sexist, they don't know what they're talking about. It's as if they want to just remake what humans are, re-engineer them and ignore all of human history up to this point. It's a silly thing to do. And by the way, people who try to do that ultimately fail. All revolutions of that kind fail in the end because they are divorced from elemental human truths. That's the reason why ancient texts are still
Well,
adapted into other mediums today.
well, the elemental truth of this movie is that men love to look at beautiful women.
Yeah.
And a man like Ned Racine would like to take that further and does get the opportunity, but he is seen coming from 100 miles away by Kathleen Turner, which is what puts him in this predicament. But if you ask Ned Racine, as he's sitting in his jail cell looking at the school yearbook where it's revealed that Matty Walker was really Mary Ann, her best friend, and would he do it again? He would probably say, I would do it again. I don't think he would be able to prevent himself from doing it. Kathleen Turner's Matty Walker character is presented as this like sexual force of nature. There's something otherworldly about her. And Kasdan taps into that because he puts her in the white blouse, or is it a white dress as well? I think when we first meet, I think she's got a red skirt. I'm trying to remember. But at the end, she's wearing like all white. And when she walks to the boathouse to get the glasses, which is going to set off the bomb, she looks like this angelic figure just disappearing into the dark. There's something ethereal about her.
Yes, for sure.
And yeah. And the way Kasdan shoots her throughout the movie is very classic in the film noir iconography, sort of a la Lauren Bacall. And he
Oh, for sure.
has
Yeah. I mean, I consider Kathleen Turner to be the 80s equivalent of Lauren Bacall. They're both poised, sophisticated,
the
and
voice.
and very sexy. Yeah, having a husky voice, and
And he
they're
has
both
that,
amazing. We don't have people like that anymore.
no, we don't. And he has that great shot where she pulls up, I think it's when she's just arrived back at her house and Ned has followed her home. and she opens the car door, and Kasdan, talk about the male gaze, 100% pure male gaze, where he focuses on her legs as she's getting out, and she drops the cigarette and she stomps it out. And I love that shot. And I love the John Barry score. We need to talk about the John Barry score
Of
that
course.
accompanies that, because John Barry, it's one of my absolute favorite John Barry scores, top five. I listen to the score all the time, and maybe alongside Out of Africa and even Jerry Goldsmith's Chinatown, my most listened to score.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it just goes over so easy. The saxophone motif, the sexiness of it. In an interview, Barry said that he got the theme from the title itself. The words "body heat," the way he sounds them, almost felt like he heard the theme in his head immediately. But he's kind of doing a sexier version of the classic Miklos Rosa score from Double Indemnity and those other movies that Rosa scored, but bringing in Barry's own particular sound and making it definitely sexier. And I think when I think of erotic thriller, and I think for many years when people made these erotic thrillers, because Body Heat did set off a whole new modern genre of it, I always felt they were always imitating the Barry score, the sort of sexy jazz with orchestral backing kind of vibe to it. But it's such a great score because it builds up the eroticism and the tension at the same time. And that scene where Ned follows Matty home to look at the wind chimes, and you know that he's lusting for her, and she knows that he's not just going to drive away. And then she says, "Okay, you've seen the chimes, leave." And he goes out to his car, and you have that overhead shot on him that comes down into him, and he's watching her through the window. And the score is just building along with like Ned's lust for her.
Yes.
And the way it just follows him as he runs to the front of the house and he grabs the patio chair that he throws through the window. And then he goes inside and he grabs it and it turns into this very hot sex scene. Barry is just playing that to perfection.
Yes.
I mean, his music is almost like orgasmic as they actually like fall into each other's arms. It's just such an amazing score. I cannot separate Body Heat in my mind from John Barry's score in this film. And it's amazing how Lawrence Kasdan knew to approach John Barry to do the score. I don't think I've seen him or John Barry speak about why Kasdan sought him out for this. He must have thought there was a sexiness to the James Bond scores too that Barry would bring to them. There was a certain effortless eroticism to those scores that comes out in like the main titles or the love themes.
Well,
But
yeah,
it is,
he has a Wagnerian capital R romantic sensibility, John Barry. So he would obviously lend himself well to a movie like this.
but also there's a darkness to it.
Yes, a dark
Barry's,
romanticism for
yeah,
sure.
which I guess is Wagnerian. But Barry's scores, where people talk about them, they're always lush and they're romantic. Yes, they're that, but there's always an undercurrent of melancholy and
And
sadness.
foreboding, or foreboding, I should say,
There
not
is
necessarily,
foreboding,
not always, but sometimes. Yeah.
but there's not a single John Barry score that I think ever crosses a line into pure sentimentality or mushiness. It's always sort of reared back by this dark undercurrent that gives it just such a,
Well,
it just
yes.
pierces my soul because I feel such a connection with that sound, unlike almost any other composer out there, who some of them have done good work in, let's say, the film noir genre, like Jerry Goldsmith or James Newton Howard or Alan Silvestri with The Bodyguard. There's so many of these
Or
composers who
Who
do
Framed
great
Roger
work.
Rabbit.
Yeah, yeah. Roger
And by
Rabbit
the
and
way,
Kathleen Turner.
yeah, Kathleen Turner's most famous femme fatale by far is Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit
But only
because
because of Body Heat.
exactly. But and it's interesting because Jessica Rabbit, if you think about it, is the ultimate subversion of the traditional film noir femme fatale, right? Because you think she's a femme fatale, she's this dangerous, hypersexualized siren type character, but then it turns out she's actually a good character, right? She's falsely, portrayed as a bad character. She's actually like it basically there's a red herring setup where we're supposed to think that she's a villain.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that was
that's what I
very
kind of said
clever.
Sea of Love was like with Ellen Barkin. I think also is the femme fatale who turns out to be not really that evil. Well, not evil at all, just but the film makes you think there's no other way that this is going to play out with other than her being the killer in question.
That's true.
In general, film noir, with these kind of scenarios, the woman is always bad. She's always literally taking the guy by the dick and leading him through the plot. And in Body Heat, she literally does that in the one scene, in the one sex scene. She literally grabs William Hurt by the penis and leads him across the room. I mean, Lawrence Kasdan is basically saying, I'm going to give it to you all. You're going to see it. And the thing with Body Heat is it is super tastefully done. So while there is a lot of nudity and sex scenes in the film, they never feel gratuitous to me. They just feel sexy and within character. But it's not a film that is, how can I say, selling you on the eroticism of it, but then the lead actress is walking across the room in a bed sheet or hiding her breasts with her elbow or any
Yes.
other of the thousand tricks where that pull you out of movie and you're supposed to be watching something that's erotic, but all it is overstaged.
Yes.
Kathleen Turner, it's her first movie, and she's completely going for it. And William Hurt is on board with it. Apparently, they minimized the crew, and William Hurt sort of cautioned the crew not to be leering at them and all of that. And yeah, for sure. But at the end of the day, they do these performances that are very difficult performances to pull off, especially if you're trying to do something that rises above the exploitation genre.
Well, this
And
movie is extremely sophisticated on every level. It's not an exploitation film by any means. I mean, it's refined all the way through aesthetically, if that makes sense. So no matter how sultry it is, it's also very respectable at the same time. I was going to ask though, have you seen the movie Crimes of Passion?
I have seen it. It's been many years ago. I don't know if I was the biggest fan of that. It was the Ken Russell film, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's another brave performance by Kathleen
Oh,
Turner.
she did many. She did many. Yeah. That is a very, it's obviously a transgressive movie, but I didn't settle into it like Body Heat because I think that movie
Oh, it's a
is
completely different type of
just
movie, yeah.
very weird for weird's sake. And I think that movie brings out some of Ken Russell's worst instincts, whereas sometimes his worst instincts worked for the movie very well. But I think it was also the budget was quite small on that film, and it felt at times like a cheap film and a strange film. But I do probably need to see it again before I fully come down on it like that. But of course, Kathleen Turner was super beautiful in that. And her career around that period was playing into her beauty. There's some actresses who are beautiful and elegant, but they don't play the sexuality. They're just cast because they're super good looking and they're very good actors and they fit the storyline.
That's
It seemed
right.
like Kathleen Turner was plugged into these movies because of how sexy she was. And then her beauty very much was part of the narrative of this is a hypersexual character, or let's take a Romancing the Stone.
Which is one of
And
my favorite movies of hers. And
in
by the
Jewel of
way,
the Nile
yeah.
is the fact that she is this very sultry woman, but in a way is playing against it, but still playing it.
Yes. No, that's a very delicate balancing act to pull off, and she does. Yeah, in Romancing the Stone specifically, she's to some extent like a mousy type woman, right?
But playing
Yeah, but she does both.
the
That's right.
yeah, playing this sort of ready to explode out
Well,
sexuality
yeah,
underneath
she's daydreaming. Well, her character in Romancing the Stone is a romance novelist who's always daydreaming about
yeah, she's
these.
very combustible.
Yeah, exactly. She's daydreaming about, meeting the perfect lover and, a
Yeah.
very romantic in more ways than one setting. So,
And
yeah, that movie's great, by
even
the way.
War of the Roses,
That's another
where
great movie.
she's playing kind of these people are both kind of despicable on some level. She gets away with it because she's so gorgeous and sexy.
And by the way, I love the trio of Michael Douglas, Kathleen Turner, and Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
I think they made great movies together. They could have just, kept going as a trio and made who knows how many other movies. But yeah, The
But when
War
you
of the
look at
Roses is a
those,
masterpiece.
yeah,
And
and
so is
also
Romancing the Stone as far as I'm concerned.
And then also The Man with Two Brains. Is that the title? With Kathleen Turner and Steve Martin.
Yes.
She's also playing like a sex pot character. And Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, right. Well, I think in terms of when it comes to her femme fatale characters, just because Who Framed Roger Rabbit is such a gigantic movie in more ways than one, right? Like it has a permanent place in popular culture. So it's going to be by default, I think, her most memorable or iconic femme fatale, which is interesting.
It is
Um,
true what you say that it is her most iconic role, which is kind of insulting since it's really an animated character. But if more people had seen or will see Body Heat, I think for me, that is always going to be her iconic role. And I
Oh,
think
and
Kathleen
Preetsy's
Turner,
Honor. I think Preetsy's Honor is a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite gangster
yeah,
films because it's one of the most honest. It
yeah. But
basically says gangsters don't have honor, not true honor. So what the hell are we talking about?
yeah, but what I just want to say about Kathleen Turner is I
Yeah.
think among cinephiles, I think she's definitely identified by Body Heat and almost became the template, or not almost, did become the template for the modern femme fatale. And I hope contemporary audiences do seek Body Heat out. I showed it to my son quite a few years ago. I think he was probably 15, 16, and I know he loved it. Criterion, by the way, has just brought out a Body Heat on 4K and remastered it straight off the negative, and it looks stunning. I don't think Lawrence Kasdan even saw it this way when it first came out, or anybody who saw it theatrically. It just looks so good now. The warmth and the heat really pops on screen now, and Barry's score sounds fantastic. It's one of those movies. You know what's interesting? I'm reminded when I watch Body Heat that all the lines of dialogue are so clearly delivered by the actors. There's no mumbling.
Yes.
And I feel today when we watch movies, we have to turn on the subtitles because actors are giving these mumbly performances where, in some level, yeah, they're going deep into character, but they're so undisciplined from the technical point of view of what an audience needs to process to understand the performance. And
Yes.
you go back to Body Heat, and there's not a line that you can't understand in that film as delivered. And that is also a thing when you go back and watch movies from the 50s, 60s,
Oh yeah, they're like
70s,
letter perfect.
80s. You can understand these movies. We're not going deaf. It's just people are not delivering dialogue with a mind that it should be understood by audiences.
That's right. And also often in at least movies from this century, dialogue has not been very important. The
It's true.
the writers are not maybe as good as the writers of the past, or we could, come up with all kinds of theories, but
Oh, it's spectacle. People want spectacle. They don't want smart characters talking. I
yeah.
saw a movie last weekend called The Invite, which I thought was excellent. And it's all about dialogue. And it's two couples who live in the same apartment building finally get together for dinner after all this time. I don't want to spoil anything about it, but it's all dialogue and it's all performance. And I doubt anybody's going to be bored in this movie because you never know where it's going from minute to minute. And it's really, really excellent. But what I love about it is you can understand the dialogue perfectly. There's no mumbling. Nobody's talking into their armpits or sneering or whatever it is. And it's a movie that centers on dialogue, script, performance, chemistry between the actors. And in a way, it's not Body Heat at all. It's not that kind of plot, but it's a little bit old school in that it engages with the audience using the script versus the visual effects.
Yes. And you won't have today an actor like Edward G. Robinson who can be letter perfect while speaking at an astonishingly fast pace, you know? And they used to have many actors who could do that, by the way, including Humphrey Bogart, including James Cagney, right? We could just go on and on. It's just truly remarkable. And not only that, if we're talking about the golden age of Hollywood, and if we're going to be very specific, if we're talking about movies made, let's say before 1970, you notice that there's sort of wit in most of the dialogue. Like it doesn't even matter what genre the film is, in many cases, there's always wit. You know what I mean? Like if
Yeah.
you look at Casablanca, or if you look at Double Indemnity, or if you look at even the Bridge on the
Or
River Kwai, I could
Trouble in
just,
Paradise.
yeah,
I
any
just watched Trouble in
number.
Paradise again. Talk about wit and sort of sexiness and fun characters to engage with and
And a sense
gorgeous
that the
people on
universe is
screen.
absurd. There you could almost make the argument that the majority of movies that were coming out of Hollywood in the Golden Age were either absurdist or proto-absurdist or semi-absurdist, right? They sort of understood the world's a crazy place. And it's interesting now when we live in particularly strange times, to put it mildly, we don't have that sort of healthy satirical reaction to what's going on, right? For some strange reason, many of our
Because
movies today are earnest
yeah,
about
they're
the
not
craziness.
dangerous. They're not,
Yeah.
movies are not dangerous enough. They're not sexy enough. Men and women don't know how to behave with each other anymore because post Me Too, nobody knows who's offending who, especially from men to women. I think we talked about this before as well. But when you watch movies from that period, especially like the 30s and 40s, maybe into the 50s as well, men and women, they enjoy each other's company and they enjoy the seduction and the dance around it. And these movies were, a lot of them were like squashed by the production code into being smarter and more subtle with how they were delivering the sexuality in
Yes.
them. But it's all there. And in pre-code movies, it's definitely there. It's not really a ton of nudity, but you could definitely tell that men and women fucked in these movies. You
That's
know what I
right.
mean? You can't tell that today. I can't tell that today. Everybody's on their fucking phones.
That's right.
I mean, these movies aren't really about sex, and they're certainly not showing the sex. And if they do, it's fake sex, or
And
it's
yeah. And one of my favorite directors, and we might do a future episode on some of his films, is Joseph von Sternberg. And I think he, in some ways, was the pioneer when it came to cinematic eroticism. He really developed not just the male gaze, but also the female gaze and
yeah,
all kinds of
yeah.
other gazes. But the thing is, what he was able to do was show one character looking at another in a subjective way and come up with extravagant visual ways of representing what was going on in the subjective character's mind. So he could externalize what was going on in their mind in very creative ways. I mean, he was a German expressionist, but he also worked, of course, in the United States.
I
And
think
I
all
I
those
think he's a fascinating
I
director.
think all those German immigrants, filmmakers to the US at that period, like Billy Wilder and Fritz Lang and Lubitsch, they all brought this European sensuality to the films and a grittiness and an adultness to the films that I don't think was typically happening in American films. Let's not forget from 1950 Sunset Boulevard, Billy Wilder is probably my favorite film of the genre, maybe, and again, another film that's stuffed into my ever-growing top 10. But Sunset Boulevard in itself is a sexy movie,
It
and
is.
it's a movie about really adult, almost transgressive themes, but it's so well crafted. And the characters, and again, Sunset Boulevard, there's not a line you can't understand in that movie. And it's got a great score, it's dark, it's edgy, it's out there. It's to this day the best film about Hollywood, the industry, and how the business eats you up and spits you out and wants you when you're young and or when you've got something that everybody else wants. But as soon as you age out a little bit or you fall on hard luck or your movie doesn't get a good review or it loses money, you suddenly become cast out of the business and you have to start over. And it shows you the struggle or what it was like for a woman who used to be a big star and a little bit like Kathleen Turner today is forgotten, or you don't have the beauty of your youth anymore, or in Kathleen Turner's case, sadly developed this illness that changed her look in a very
Yeah, what a
extreme
what
way.
a terrible situation.
Yeah. And I think, for these people who are famous or extremely beautiful and attractive to be that, to have the world celebrate you in that way for, let's say, 10, 15 years, and for it to suddenly go away must be so much worse than never having it at all. And a movie like Sunset Boulevard, which isn't the subject of our podcast today, but it really nails all that.
It does.
And in terms of body heat, I feel for Kathleen Turner, although she still has this legacy of these amazing movies she did to look back on, and
Of
it
course.
wasn't somebody's fantasy. She lived that. She was that. And people who watch Body Heat today, and I watch it many times over and over, and I still will watch it over and over. I appreciate her for how she was on the screen then. And if you've never seen Body Heat, you're seeing Kathleen Turner for the first time.
I don't think there are any actresses that have emerged, let's say let's say since 2010, who have a body of work as impressive as Kathleen Turner's body of work from, let's say, the 1980s alone. She's got multiple masterpieces there that will be overtly impressive forever, at least
I
from
don't
my
think,
subjective
yeah,
perspective.
I just think actors, there's a an aura of pretentiousness about their choices today, where unlike the period where Kathleen Turner came up and she was doing movies like Body Heat and Romancing the Stone, I think they would think those movies are kind of beneath them or sort of overtly using their sexuality to tell the story, and that would make them somewhat uncomfortable unless
Anyway,
you.
but you know what's funny about that is she's also, though, more sophisticated than, let's say, any of the actresses who would never show a sexual side on screen. In other words, the irony is she is, though, extremely intelligent. She's not just playing like this ditzy character, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? In other words, is there any actress ever who on screen came across as intellectually sophisticated as Kathleen Turner? I mean, she's right up there with people like Betty Davis and Katharine Hepburn and Lauren
Yeah,
Bacall.
I was going to say Betty Davis, who was unbelievably unique in her persona, in that if you just looked at her or saw a still picture of her, you wouldn't necessarily think Betty Davis was that gorgeous. But then you see her in a movie like Now Voyager, and she just stuns. And you
Yes.
go, Betty Davis is a truly beautiful woman. And you put her in the right fashions and the right lighting, and she's just,
Well,
I
isn't
think,
it
one of the more
ironic
beautiful
also?
movie stars.
Correct, but isn't it also ironic that before, let's say, the sort of militant 70s feminist movement, you ironically had actresses who were more sophisticated than almost any of the ones that came or emerged after the 1970s. In other
Well,
words,
I don't.
when was the last time
Yes,
there was a Katharine Hepburn? When was the last time there was
well, you
a
didn't have a
Betty
Catherine
Davis?
Hepburn, but you had Jane Fonda, you had Faye Dunaway. I mean, I think those actresses who
Yeah, but
broke
they
through
came up
in the
before the
70s.
70s, before the 70s. I said after the 70s.
Well, no, I think
I'm not saying there
they're,
was not literally one, by the way. I'm just saying in
yeah.
general, there's a
No,
decline.
there
Just saying.
definitely a class of them that were there. I would add Jill Clayburgh to that group who weren't afraid of their sexuality, even Julie Christie in Don't Look Now. But most of the roles and performances of the period you're talking about, whether it's pre-code or it's the 40s and 50s, which was the prime film noir period, these were elegant, smart, calculating characters
Powerful,
that these
powerful
women were
women.
playing, whether it's Barbara Stanwyck, Betty Davis. And when Kathleen Turner takes that over, let's be clear, it's not just about how beautiful she was and her sexiness. She was a fucking good actress.
That's what I'm
And
saying. Yeah.
and it takes a lot to take Lawrence Kasdan's very stylized noirish dialogue and to have that repartee with William Hurt. If you miscast Body Heat, as I'm sure Kasdan was well aware of at the time, that movie gets sunk. You have to have people with the skill set and the performance and to embody the Matty Walker character in such a way that she doesn't come off as a cartoon, like a Lauren Bacall pastiche.
Yes.
She is sophisticated and she projects almost this sort of calculated fragility, but then there's the sexuality. And then by the end of the movie, the last shot of Body Heat, where she's won, she's got the money, William Hurt's in prison. She's sitting on this exotic island with some gigolo next to her where you never see him. And the camera travels around her face. And you can tell in that performance that even the manipulative bitch that she played, she did fall in love with William Hurt's character. There's a
Yeah.
sense of loss in just her expression and body language. And we get that. And it takes an actress of extreme sophistication to pull that off.
That's right. For sure. But even if you want to talk about, let's say, actresses who are, or at least they project themselves as being extremely literate in more ways than one, and Kathleen Turner is one of them. And by the way, it's not just actresses, this applies to actors as well, right? It's not just one sex that we're talking about here. I just think in
Yeah.
general, well, it's not just the actor. So in a way, today's actors reflect the times we live in. We live in less sophisticated times. So in a way, I guess you could say it makes sense that most of our actors are also not as sophisticated as the ones that used to exist.
But I think
Um,
these actors are more concerned with who's the filmmaker and how am I going to look in this film and how am I going to come off versus just this is riveting subject matter, the script. I dig it. I would want to see this movie, but I don't want to be naked, or I don't want to play someone so evil, or I don't want to play someone who threatens children, or whatever the fucking impediment to just being in a enjoyable, fun, provocative movie. There's so many like steps you have to dance through with them because
Yes.
they're all so image conscious. And that's why they're all like, well, this actor's only going to work with A, B, C, D director in the A-list because they think that that director's body of work is going to protect them or preserve their image. And as you notice, there's certain A-list stars that work with 5 directors max. And they should be at their most courageous in seeking out material that takes them out of their comfort zone
Yes.
and putting the script above everything else. If I was a big star out there, I wouldn't let the fact that a filmmaker didn't have a successful movie or 2 movies in a row, if he's shown that he has done good work in the past, I wouldn't let that be impediment to how much you love the script and how much you love the character. But that's happening all the time. In today's industry, and I speak to this from personal experience, these stars are choosing filmmakers over material. And that's also where I think there's a big problem in how crappy so many of these movies are. They're
Yes.
just because the big stars get the financing and they may not be right for these roles.
That's right.
So much, I see so much miscasting going on. I'm constantly going to movies and saying, if only so and so could have played this role, or if this was 20, 30 years ago, if so and so could have done this role. But I just feel like it's all about the value of actors getting plugged into mediocre scripts, or if the script's good, it's the wrong actor.
But we also
It,
don't have, if you want to talk about diversity, we don't have diversity of eccentric types anymore.
yeah,
So, for example, an actor like James Mason, I couldn't even imagine a young James Mason emerging today. Everything
yeah.
about him is
As
just,
a lead actor, though, you know what I mean? Not just as a supporting
yeah.
actor, but as
But
a
even as a
lead.
supporting actor, to be honest with you, could you imagine, let's say, a 30-something-year-old James Mason emerged today? Like in terms of just how, posh he is and how,
Or Edward G. Robinson.
or Edward, yeah, exactly. Or William
I
Hickey.
mean, Edward G. Robinson was a movie star.
That's right.
And not just in roles where he played gangsters, but like in Double Indemnity, where he's the good guy, so to speak, or the insurance investigator. There were so many of these actors throughout history who didn't present as being like these square-jawed leading men who were so interesting to watch in anything.
That's
I mean,
right.
I think, like
Including
I'd say,
Humphrey
Mike,
Bogart.
yeah, but I'd say like in the last 20, 30 years, like Michael Keaton can do anything, you know,
Yes, he's great.
and Michael Keaton is a nice looking man, but he's not like one of these macho men. And I remember when he was cast in Batman, Tim Burton's Batman, everybody was freaking out because they expected some square-jawed, studly movie star to play Batman, whereas Tim Burton was smart enough to realize Michael Keaton had the eccentricity to pull
Yes,
off such an eccentric character.
that's right.
And people only saw that after the fact. Same with casting Daniel Craig as James Bond. I know that's not necessarily a casting decision you're in love with, but I thought it was fantastic. And Craig, being the great actor he is, just paid off on it. And I think next to Sean Connery, he was the best James Bond because he was, in my opinion, a real actor.
And I think perhaps the reason we don't have as many eccentric people, what's funny, I was just, see, it depends how you look at this. And I was going to say, like, we don't have eccentric people anymore, in prominent places, but that's not true. We have really eccentric, batshit crazy people in government, for example. But I will also say they're not sophisticated. In other words, you still won't find an eccentric today like James Mason or even Cary Grant, because Cary Grant was eccentric. He made up his own voice. No one ever had a voice like his, right? I
But
mean,
Cary Grant fit the mold of the good-looking male
of
lead. I
course,
mean, the
but he,
Cary
but
Grant
no
was
one
like
talks
George
like it.
Clooney playing
Yes, but the
more
difference
lighter
is,
material.
I agree, but if you think about it, Cary Grant was not, nothing about him was ordinary. I mean, obviously, in some ways that's obvious, but what I mean is, like, in other words, his stylish demeanor obviously was not ordinary. But what I'm saying is his voice, if you think about it, was quite eccentric. That's not a normal voice.
Yeah,
Like if
I
someone
mean,
today, let me give you an example. If there was a young actor today who spoke the way that he did, and there was no explanation for why it is that he speaks that way, you would say that's strange.
I would have to take a deep dive into that because I never thought of Cary Grant as having a unusual
Well, he
way of
was
talking. I
covering
always
up
felt
he was
he came
covering
off
up his
very
Cockney
elegant,
act. Yes, but he was covering up his Cockney accent, so
as
he sort of
many actors do today.
yeah, yeah, but I mean, not no one did it the way he did. It's hard to place his voice. You can't tell where he even came from.
It's a
And
very
don't
distinctive voice for
Yeah,
sure, but I would also contend like Humphrey Bogart would not be considered a
that's right.
traditional leading man today at all
Correct.
because he's kind
That's
of
right.
got strange looks, but not unappealing. And Sean Connery, I thought Sean Connery was a very sexy male lead, but I don't know if he was traditionally handsome. I think Connery has a very, he has very angular features. He has a very almost like interestingly pronounced nose that when you see like cartoons of Connery, they always emphasize the nose and the eyebrows. But Connery was the full package. This amazing actor, amazing personality as an actor, had this very confident vibe on screen, especially once he took over James Bond. He could move so well. He was like a panther.
That's
He was
right.
tall. He was well built. I don't know if Sean Connery becomes a star in today's industry. I actually don't even think this business today or the industry looks at the more traditional.
Well, with very few exceptions, if you think about it, all of the great artists, and if we're talking about actors specifically, are eccentric. That's what makes them stand out. So, in other words, every one of these lead actors that we've just mentioned and actresses before, they all have something peculiar about them, but in a positive way that makes them memorable and
Distinctive.
also,
They have
yeah,
to be
distinctive. That's
distinctive.
right. Correct. Like, in other words,
Like good looks isn't just going to cut it anymore. You have to be like Al Pacino is the perfect example, right? He's kind of a short guy. I would say he was handsome, but I wouldn't say he was pinup handsome. I think he had a quality to him, same as De Niro.
yes,
Both those guys, if you saw them in a lineup of like studly guys on the beach, I don't think they would draw your eye.
no,
But and Dustin Hoffman, that's another one. I mean,
yeah.
Dustin Hoffman, I don't think Dustin Hoffman becomes a movie star today. And they all had like an interesting eccentricity, exactly what you say. I mean, all three of those actors are eccentrics and take on roles where they have played very strange characters at
Or someone
times.
like Jack Nicholson, right? There you go.
Perfect example.
Or
I don't
even
know that Jack Nicholson becomes a movie star today. I think he's a supporting actor.
That's right. If you want a bland lead, then we have no shortage of those today. And it doesn't matter if it's male or female.
Ironically, the one who I think probably survives and does maintain his movie star status is Warren Beatty
But
because
even he
Warren
had
Beatty he
eccentricity,
was
relatively
very
speaking.
eccentric.
Yeah,
Beatty as a person was very eccentric, but he also had a kind of a classical pretty boy look that I
of
think is in
course.
vogue today still.
Yeah. Well, and also he was I shouldn't say he was, he's still alive. So he is a great director as well. Reds is, I think, a great movie. And Bulworth and Heaven Can Wait, which he directed with Buck Henry. But even Bonnie and Clyde, if we're just talking about his performance, it's an eccentric performance. I mean, even
And
the fact, oh, go on.
I was going to say, what male actor who I am assuming Warren Beatty was in his 20s when he did it or early 30s would play somebody who's impotent,
Exactly. That is one of the, you want to talk
possibly
about
even gay.
transgressive. Yeah, so that
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So here's the thing. You want to talk about being transgressive. Having a movie star as good looking as Warren Beatty play an impotent character, that's, one of the most transgressive things imaginable. If you think about it, when it comes
Yeah,
to the portrayal of
with today's
sexuality on
social
screen.
media following, these actors aren't interested in taking on that character and creating this deep lived-in performance about somebody who had all of this. They're more worried about their fans thinking that they couldn't go to bed with somebody.
And then what's even more transgressive in a way, but also true to life, Faye Dunaway as Bonnie, she loves him anyway, despite his impotence, right? In other words, this is a movie that has very good-looking leads, and yet the characters that they're playing are not solely interested in looks or sex even. which is
Well, she is
interesting.
exasperated by the fact that he can't
No, but
fuck
I
her.
mean, she sticks with him. She sticks with him and
She
loves him
does.
deeply,
She
regardless. So
does.
that's so what I'm saying is, if you think about that,
Yeah.
that's even more transgress. Like you wouldn't see a depiction of that today. So anyway, both things you wouldn't see today. You wouldn't see a good-looking male character suddenly be impotent for no
When
other
was the
reason.
last time? When was the last time an A-list actress played a prostitute in a legitimate performance like Jane Fonda and Clute?
It's been a while. Well, wait,
Um,
Honora, I guess,
but
but
she wasn't a well-known actress before that time.
that's right.
I'm saying somebody who's really solidified. I mean, it was probably Julia Roberts, right?
Well, if you're okay, so there has to be a distinction here, an iconic performance versus just a
I mean, it
performance that
was kind of
maybe.
yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to equate Pretty Woman on the level of Clute in terms of the quality or the substance of the movie because
Or
I
even
do
just
think
have no, because what I mean is there could be, if I start thinking about this more deeply, there could be movies where a prominent actress plays a prostitute, but just the movie never became iconic the way that, let's say, Pretty Woman became iconic.
but I'm talking about where the prostitute is the role. She didn't just happen to be a prostitute and then got involved in a jewel robbery or something. The character is playing a prostitute. So
Yes, the point is
in
it doesn't happen often. That's the point. Not anymore, at least. Yeah. Because, think about it. Even in the 50s, many actresses were playing prostitutes or a character that was the equivalent of a prostitute. And
yeah,
some of them even won Academy Awards for playing roles like that.
yeah, I'm sure we're overlooking certain roles besides Pretty Woman. But Pretty Woman was originally written to be much darker. The original script was much darker. I think it was called 3000 originally. And Richard Gere's character does not end up with Julia Roberts' character in the end. He leaves her. And of course, because the one thing executives understand is if you create a happy ending in a what's essentially a romantic comedy and you bring the characters together in the end, you're going to have a much bigger box office because for some reason American audiences can't handle tragedy.
Actually, now you somehow reminded me, in the movie Mighty Aphrodite, you have well, she's not a prostitute, she's a porn actress, porn star. And that movie's not like
But it's a
hugely
comedy.
well. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But she did win an Oscar, Mira Sorvino, for playing that part.
Oh, actresses have won many Oscars for playing
No,
prostitutes.
I'm
That's
talking, but
the
in
thing.
somewhat more modern times. But you know what? That's
Yeah.
already 31 years ago, that movie. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about what you propose. But no, I agree with you
Well,
anyway. I agree with you anyway. Definitely, there have not been too many movies.
well, now, let's put it this way. I don't think there are a lot of movies being made today like Body Heat where the lead actress's performance hinges on the sexuality of the character. And I don't mean like Poor Things where she's lost her brain and she's discovering who she is again and she's discovered sex in that weird way. I'm talking about characters who know about sex, who are in control of the sexuality, and the sexuality is driving the plot, driving the narrative for them to get something they want. For example, and it's been many, many years since, Basic Instinct,
Yes.
which is a movie, super transgressive movie. I do have some problems with the screenplay, but I love Basic Instinct. I love Sharon Stone's performance of that character, Catherine Trammell, and she owns it, playing like this
And
very
it's a great satire. I love
yeah.
Paul Verhoeven in general. He's one of my
Yeah, she's
favorite
playing basically a very transgressive
caricaturists.
Grace Kelly type,
Yes.
which is sort of what we all wanted to see at some point. And she's owning that in the like Body Heat. She's owning the fact that she can twist Michael Douglas's character around her finger, get him to do anything she wants because she's so hot and she is so irresistible. And that is from the casting, in the writing, to everything about the movie. The filmmaker has to be cognizant that this
We're gonna
is
have to do an
the
episode on Basic
engine.
Instinct.
We have it on our list, I believe.
Yeah, but I'm just reiterating
Yeah,
because Paul
there's a lot to
Verhoeven
talk
is a
about with
genius.
Basic Instinct for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
Basic Instinct is so much more than the. I think it's one of those cases where Basic Instinct is so much more than the script, the Joe Esterhaus script. Whereas in the case of Body Heat, I think Body Heat is the script. I think Body Heat starts with this beautifully constructed, witty, sexy script. Lawrence Kasdan is a phenomenal writer.
Well,
All of his
the
script.
difference also between the two movies, among many others, is that Paul Verhoeven is a caricaturist, and so he exaggerates, for various reasons, human behaviors and even appearances. right? So, for example, the sex scenes in Basic Instinct are over the top
Yeah.
in a sort of meta artistic way. He's almost commenting on
But they
pornography itself because
but they're
he's,
both but the sex scenes in Body Heat and Basic Instinct certainly have something in common. That is, you are taking your life in your hands by fucking this person.
yes,
And
definitely, definitely.
and although Body Heat does it in, I would say, maybe a classier, more classic way, and Verhoeven is, let's show everything and let's be as transgressive as we can be, the characters are operating under the same sort of rules, and the bait to get
Yes.
them into those situations is this beautiful women. And I don't diminish that at all, because history is filled with graveyards of men who have fallen to beautiful women or done the wrong thing for beautiful women and ended up on the gallows or murdered or what,
And by the
doing
way, we
life
do
in
we do
prison.
have movies, even old movies, that feature the male equivalent of a femme fatale. So, for example, you can look at a movie like A Kiss Before Dying with Robert Wagner playing
Uh-huh.
this. You've seen the movie, I take it.
Yeah, and the
So
Matt Dillon remake.
yeah, but I think that the 1956 original is a masterpiece. I'm a big Ira Levin fan in general, so I love
Oh,
Rosemary's
me
Baby. I
too.
love The
I
Boys from
love
Brazil, on and on.
I think he was
Death
one of the
Trap.
next to Philip K. Dick. I think he was one of the smartest writers who came up with the most brilliant concepts.
Yes. And that movie, if you think about it, establishes, like, if you want to talk about the male gaze, this has like a,
The
I
female.
don't even know what to call, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a bisexual
Well,
gaze. I
what do
don't
you
know,
call
but
what would you say American Gigolo is? Because that's a complicated one,
bisexual
right?
gaze. Yeah,
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 because
because it,
it's definitely, the camera just loves Richard Gere and shows him in all his
well, not
glory, and
only,
women
yeah,
were
but
loving that.
not only that, he by far is the most prominently displayed character in the movie. In other words, none of the
But the
women.
movie's still sexy in a
Oh, it is, of
heterosexual
course. Yeah, it
way,
is. Yeah.
because you got Lauren Hutton. She does a nude scene and she's super sexy in some of the scenes that you find Gary in. But it's very interesting whether the critics who are quick to unholster the male gaze would analyze American Gigolo. Somehow, I suspect they would still call it the male gaze.
Well, the other thing too is there are other movies where you have the male equivalent of a femme fatale. It not necessarily in a film noir. I mean, there are those as well, like A Kiss Before Dying, but there are many characters who are male who are seducing women in a variety of different ways for a variety of different purposes. And we don't really have characters like that anymore, to be honest.
Well, in a way, I guess it comes back to another Richard Gere movie too, which is the remake of Breathless. Uh, it feels like let's take any Richard Gere movie, and he's doing that more or less.
Well, if you look at all, and if let's say we're talking about a number of different Alain Delon movies, he's sort of the seducer.
Yeah, yeah,
There's so many that you could choose from. And then sometimes though he plays like this Alyosha or Prince Mishkin type character where, he's like the innocent who's being corrupted by the women around him, like in Rocco and his brothers. But the point is there's many movies where he's the seducer, whether it's Purple Noon or The Swimming Pool or,
yeah.
on and on.
Well, I think that is a classic movie trope of the, like, the even what do you call it, like the Montgomery Clift Place in the Sun. Is that the movie where?
Yeah, see, there you have an equal
Yeah,
opportunity movie because there the male lead and the female lead are, basically equally attractive. And again, so it's not just a male gaze that's set up. There's something else going on. And then
what's
also,
that? And the other great Lawrence Harvey movie, Room at the Top. Is
oh,
that
that's
the
a great
title?
movie. Yeah, it's a
That's
great
a
movie.
great movie. A total seducer, right?
Yes.
But it's really the gravitas that these roles bring about and how they're constructed and written and providing like enough of a meaty role for actors to get into. But when you take a movie like Clute, on the surface, it's like a prostitute being harassed by or being watched by some pervy psychopath, and that could be the plot for almost 100 movies that came out around that period or beyond. But the way the film focuses on Jane Fonda and her character and has just little touches, like when she's having sex with the one client and looks at her watch, which is a classic moment from Clue.
Yeah.
You know, it just that little action, whether that was scripted or not, just informs you so much about the situation. And then also talking about the male gaze again, right? Get back into, or the female gaze, Midnight Cowboy.
Yes, so there
That's
you
such
that's an interesting movie.
that's such an interesting movie because in one of our podcasts you talked about how explicit it was, but the truth is there isn't a lot of female nudity in that film. It's explicit in content and groundbreaking in presenting gay situations in a movie like that.
Well, that movie, in terms of, yeah, I agree with everything you just said, but it feels more transgressive than movies that came after it. Not every movie, obviously, that came after it, but many that came after it, because it finds this sort of melancholy way of expressing some of these sexual things. So that's what makes it like more disturbing or darker and depressing. I think Midnight Cowboy is one of the most depressing movies ever made.
I agree with you, and it also brings us back to John Barry. That
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that
when he's
harmonica theme
yeah,
is so depressingly beautiful, right?
yeah. I mean, that movie, if you think about it, just in terms of being emotionally powerful, it's quite extraordinary, right? For a movie that is 57 years old, it is quite powerful, in every possible respect, but in a transgressive way, right? I'm
In a
not because
very,
there's
it's a
many
very,
movies
it
from the
makes you
past that
very
I
uncomfortable, that movie, because you think, on some level, it is this big,
we should do an episode
sparkling.
On that too.
Yeah, it's like this delicious candy bar that takes place in New York City in this period where it's at its grittiest, and there's so much color on screen and odd characters. But it's also the situation is so depressing, and these characters are on the down and out, and they're living in these like burnout slums, and you feel for them. This guy comes to New York with all the vigor of like this, what is he, from Texas or something, gigolo who thinks he's going to take New York in his stride, and the first woman he hits on, he ends up having to pay her.
And what that
um
she gives a great performance, Sylvia Miles,
Sylvia
great.
Miles, yeah, yeah. There's so much. It is great, and I cannot see the scene again in Midnight Cowboy when the young Bob Balaban who takes him into the movie theater and gives him the blowjob.
Yeah.
I can't see anyone having the balls to do that scene today
No,
because
that's what
it'd
I'm
be
saying. It's extraordinary that that movie came out in 1969 because obviously I wasn't alive to see it at that point, but I can only imagine how controversial the movie must have felt to the average audience member, right, at that time. Because if
and
it's,
yet was hugely embraced enough to win Best Picture.
yep, which is extraordinary. Or
Yeah.
let's say the scene where, well, actually, we should cover that when we do our episode on
Yeah,
Midnight.
let's hold back all that for when we do Midnight Cowboy, the episode.
But actually, the movie has both of these movies, Body Heat and Midnight Cowboy, are both scored by John Barry, so there is a connection.
As so many of those great films from the
Yeah.
period were. What I love about Body Heat that Kasdan did, and I mentioned this briefly before, is he took the template of the 1940s and 50s film noir, murder mystery. He took all the tropes of those films, but he brought them into the modern age by finally allowing these movies to show nudity and to have profanity and a little bit more violence. I think he was the first one to really do it, in my opinion. And I don't just mean a movie about a murder or a movie about a seductress. He really plays into the tropes of that period. So, for example, you have the scene where Kathleen Turner presents William Hurt with a fedora, and he's looking at it in the car window, which is what all those characters wore in those movies. He's constantly winking to the
Yes.
audience about this movie could be set in 1940s or 1950s, but I'm giving you the contemporary version. And every time you thought, wouldn't it be exciting or a turn on to see Barbara Stanwyck nude or Lauren Bacall nude in a scene which wasn't schlocky, but so many of those scenes never took you into the bedroom beyond like seeing the curtains blowing in the breeze. He's like, I'm going to show you what these noirish characters would actually engage in. It sounds obvious, but it wasn't being done in that way. Even Chinatown, which isn't the same kind of movie because while Chinatown is very much a noir and there's a tiny little bit of like nudity, although it is a very sexy movie in my opinion, is still played for being a period movie. Whereas Body Heat, when it came out, was a contemporary movie.
That's right.
And I just don't think by 1981, I don't know if anybody had really tipped the hat to that kind of film as a contemporary movie with these noirish tropes.
Yeah, if you're
Although,
talking about, yeah, so there's a distinction that has to be made, right? A movie that's a period piece but has been updated to show more
yeah.
sex in it
So a
overtly.
movie that came out, I think, around that time, Cutter's Way, for example, which is also a top 10 movie for me that I adore, also feels like it could have characters from that period involved in that kind of situation, but again, played in a contemporary way, in a sexy way. And that's definitely a movie I'd love to talk about in one of these shows because Lisa Eichhorn's performance in that
Well,
movie is an all-time.
Speaking of Cutter's Way, the director Ivan Passer, he did a great made-for-television film called Stalin, and that movie would be transgressive today because it would ruin the party for all of the crazy communists we see now getting elected, right? Because they're so ahistorical in their thinking, or they're just evil and want to do what Stalin did or what Mao
Well, any
did.
movie that really looked at the movement with a sharp eye, even Reds would do it, but they're not going to sit for three
Yeah,
hours
I know
because
the, you know what's
because that would take time away from the protesting.
Yeah, no, actually, Reds is one of the most transgressive films ever made because it's such a literate, such an intelligent film, right? And it's an epic at the same time. Young people, they'd end up like the Martians in Mars Attacks. Their heads will just explode trying to watch.
I think
I
their
mean,
heads would
obviously,
explode.
I'm exaggerating. Obviously, there's some people like me, for example, who would love it. But in
Well,
general, if
I
I had
think
to
I
guess,
think their heads would explode just watching Body Heat and
that's
seeing
true.
major actors be comfortable in their own bodies doing these provocative scenes and still acting while doing them.
That's
Because
right.
what's interesting about Body Heat is every one of these sex scenes in Body Heat is done in character. So when Kathleen Turner is having sex with William Hurt, her character is present and she's giving him his every fantasy. And William Hurt is like, I can't believe I'm with this woman. And they're not just, and let's cut to the sex scene. And then, okay, after the sex scene, let's resume the dialogue. They are performing throughout these scenes, which is what all great sex scenes in movies do, is they move the story forward because they give you insight into these characters in the most intimate way. Whether it's, again, going back to Don't Look Now or take a movie like Shampoo, which is another movie which would not be made today, and especially not in that way, not with that character. But these movies have something in common, though, which is a thread that I gravitate to. No matter how dark the plots may be, these movies are fun. They're fun to engage with,
Yes.
and the characters are having fun. Even, the sex is fun, the eroticism is fun. We enjoy spending time with these characters. They're not morose movies. They're not movies of people apologizing for the bad sex they did have or apologizing for any kind of sexual behavior or the movie shaming them because they enjoyed sex. All which I think are themes that we see today, or this tiptoeing around sexuality because somebody's sensibility is going to be offended. And in these films, many times,
Well, here's the funny
you
thing. It used to be that artists would punish characters who are having too much fun in their sexcapades, let's say.
especially in horror films.
Exactly. Instead of self-flagellating in real life. And now we sort of have the reverse, you can maybe say, right? In other words, because here's the thing, there are problems that come from sex, and I'm not just talking about diseases, where sex can be an annoyance. And it can also disrupt society, right? It can cause a lot of antisocial problems, right? So it makes sense that since the dawn of time, artists have punished characters in their works who, let's say, are too free
Yeah.
in their sexcapades. In other words, there is something like just like we were talking about before, like how there are certain femme fatale things all throughout the history of the arts. There are also negative depictions of, or at least depictions of the negative ramifications that can come from pursuing sex too freely, let's just say.
Well, even
So,
Body Heat,
well, there you go. Exactly.
it
He
shows
gets punished.
he gets punished. But as I contend, if you said to him, "Could you have that time with Kathleen Turner again, or would you want you be out of prison?" I think this guy would want to go back and do it over in the same way, because that's how alluring Kathleen Turner's character was, which is one of the classic tropes of the femme fatale in these films. The thing that I keep emphasizing is that where Ned Racine ends up at the end of this movie and where Kathleen Turner ends up, we don't feel super depressed about it. I feel like Ned Racine got his money's worth. And
Well, also, wouldn't you argue that when there's a twist ending like this, where one bad character outmaneuvered another, it's sort of tongue in cheek, right? Like, in other words, that's part of what makes it a satisfying experience from the audience's perspective, right? Like, whenever we watch these film noirs and there's a double cross, it's enjoyable to see one character
yeah,
outmaneuver or outfox another, right?
and it also reminds me of Out of the Past, and the remake Against All Odds
Mm-hmm.
had very similar vibe. Now, if you take Taylor Hackford's Against All Odds, it's a very sexy movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun movie to engage with. The ending is pretty well calibrated. I like the
It
ending.
has a great Phil Collins song.
Yeah, yeah, but it's also not such a downer. There's a little bit of optimism in it, but
Yes.
it's not the happily ever after, and it's not the happily destroyed life ever after. It sort of works at both. But even though there's not a lot of real nudity in that movie because Rachel Ward wasn't into it, it is a very sexy movie.
It
And so
is.
that's also something that I don't have a problem with movies. And I'll use The Postman Always Rings Twice as another example. Let's say an actress does not want to do the nudity, but is willing to fully invest in making it the sexiest performance ever. I'm happy to watch movies like this where I feel like, okay, you didn't show anything in sense of the authenticity of what we're watching, but your performance was so good and you were so invested in it that I happily went along with it and believed in it and was probably aroused by watching those scenes. But you have to be so into the role and you have to be such a damn good actor to get me to that place if you're going to toy with me all the time and then not deliver. Because really, what these movies say is to the audience member via the trailer, via the poster, via the publicity, come and see the sexy erotic movie and you are going to see things. And you are going to see beautiful people naked, whether it's male or female, and you're going to see hot scenes. And then what you get today is the dead cold, overstaged, over calculated, or overprotected because of the intimacy supervisors kind of do this, do that, do this, do that. There's no,
Well, not only that,
but I was,
politics isn't
yeah,
sexy. So when you
they're not,
politicize sexuality, it's like now you're looking at some sort of socio-political experiment in a test tube or in a petri dish. That's what's also wrong.
yeah,
Whereas
by,
Body Heat and all the other movies we mentioned that we love do not do that. The furthest
yeah.
thing that is on the minds of the artists who made these movies is some sort of political commentary, right? Body Heat's not a political commentary. None of these movies are.
But in choreographing them, by taking out the spontaneity, you take out the sophistication of it.
That also.
You reduce it to like a over rehearsed dance instead
Mhm.
of a discovery of performers. So if you take a sex scene out of it and you have two performers and they constantly are surprising each other with the delivery or their body movements or maybe a improv line, a sex scene is just that. It's another scene that's supposed to inform you about characters, that's supposed to move the story forward, that's supposed to invest you deeper in this relationship. And when you rehearse them to the point where there isn't that spontaneity, as you see in these classic movies, how can they possibly work? They become sleazy because they don't feel lived in and they don't feel authentic. And that's why Basic Instinct or Body Heat or Sea of Love or Clue or all of these films work so well is because these are two actors getting in the room and throwing down and saying, let me do my best work. And it's acting. They're not actually having sex. We are being asked to go inside their inner lives and their intimacy. And like, for example, and I somehow always go back to the sex scene. I don't know why. It's also beautifully edited. Don't Look Now. That sex scene informs you so much about that relationship because of the tragedy that they're going through this couple, and the fact that they still have sex and there's still this tenderness among them, it gives so much to the characters in the films. But we want to just tell audiences sex on screen is something older people did and everybody was uncomfortable doing it and we're uncomfortable watching it and we don't need it because it should just be implied. I say, fuck that. Have some courage and artistic courage and make the best movie you can. I mean, the movie I did, The Cooler, would not be the same movie without those sex scenes. It just wouldn't be.
And that's a masterpiece.
Well, thank
But
you. But, I mean,
yeah.
that's the point.
But yeah, but the thing is, when you have these new Victorians, because that's basically what these people are, whether they realize it or not, they probably don't know what I'm talking about because they're
No,
they're
we're
not
just
knowledgeable about
old.
history.
We're just old and we're just male gazers.
No, but this idea that beyond that though, the idea that you have to hide sexuality.
Well, I'm old.
Yeah, but I mean it's just a silly idea, right? This self-censorship. It's not healthy, I'll tell you that much. And it's not healthy in many different ways. It's not healthy when it comes to the diversity of things that can be dramatized. Right? We always talk today about diversity in a very totalitarian way, in a very dogmatic way, in a very narrow way. But if we want to talk about real diversity, we should be able to explore whatever we want thematically and aesthetically in art. And anyone who tries to say, well, no, you should actually include this, that, or the other instead of whatever you as an artist want to do, I mean, that person is acting like a
Well,
totalitarian censor or
it's no surprise that the most transgressive, explicit movies today are movies with gay relationships. Those movies are completely going for it. And they seem to be welcomed by critics and audiences. I
yeah,
mean,
because
critics,
it's a political it's a political phenomenon, and I
a
don't
lot
like
of
that.
a lot of times it is the critics that sort of shoot these movies down that have any kind of overt sexuality because they felt uncomfortable watching it. Well, sorry. Who said going to see a movie was you signed off on this movie is going to make you feel comfortable? I'd much rather the audience feels uncomfortable watching
Exactly.
certain scenes. And by the way, from a director's point of view, directing these sex scenes is fucking hell on earth. They are the
Hmm.
worst scenes to direct. I don't look forward to them when they're in I look forward to them existing in the film because what they do for the film. But I dread actually directing these scenes because everybody is so on edge and there's this such a sense of discomfort about everything. And, you know, you're reducing the crew and there's this just a pervasive sense of we're doing something forbidden and this and that, you know, and then the choreography is thank God for actors who truly understand about once the camera rolls, they get into it and they do it in a fun and responsible way. But anyone who thinks it's fun to be on the set directing a sex scene with two actors, it's the least thing from being fun. And you're in the least position of enjoyment. At least if, let's say, the two actors are attracted to each other, they're probably going to have a sort of intimacy that's only given to people outside of marriage to actors. But even that is stressful for them. It's super stressful. And if they don't like each other, it's even more stressful. So
Of
very few
course.
people are actually perving and having fun during these scenes, which is why you should only put them in the movie when they actually serve the movie.
But like I
Even
said, it's beyond, yes, that everything you just said is true, but this is a much bigger problem because it just, whoever, especially if it's young people who are complaining about the depiction of sex on screen, it just shows how historically illiterate they are, right? Because all throughout history, we've had explicit works of art. We've also had periods where people become shy or become oppressive. But my point is, they don't seem to know this, right? They seem to think that the world began when they entered university or wherever it is that they're being brainwashed. And nothing happened before that, right? Because they're also very narcissistic, right? They're very solipsistic. Everything's in their head
or on their phone.
or on their phone, or it has to be right in front of their nose, right? Anything that's happening somewhere else that they aren't privy to, it doesn't exist.
And yet I will maintain that they watch the most transgressive porn that has ever been created in the
Hmm.
history of pornography. You go to the sites that they go to, and it is fucking the weirdest gangbang kind of stuff. Anything goes up any hole kind of shit. It is super, super transgressive. And there's no, like, at least in the porn movies of the 70s and 80s, some of them were really good films if you just sat back and looked at them from a point of view of craft and character. Let's take the opening of Misty Beethoven, which I think is a really good porn film.
Yes.
Probably the best one. That movie is funny, and it's like a retelling of Pygmalion as a pornography film, but
Yes.
all the characters are very appealing, and there's a lot of humor to it, and it's a well-told story, and you actually feel for the characters, despite the fact that there's hardcore sex scenes. Or The Devil in Miss Jones, where it's very much a porn film that's commenting on, in a way, morality and the fact that this woman did not live a very adventurous sexual life, and when she kills herself, she makes the case to go back to Earth before she's condemned to hell and to live the life she should have lived. These are not the porn scenarios that these younger generations are watching. They're just watching calisthenics of sex. There's no investment in any kind of storyline. And it is quite laughable today when you watch porn movies from the 70s, how they were shot in film, how they put so much. They were still very low budgets, but some of them were really striving with production design and costume and trying to get better performances. They were really striving for a certain legitimacy. And there is nothing like that anymore.
Correct, because everything today is about short-term gratification when it comes to certain people.
Well,
And so, like, I actually wrote a whole novel about this. I mean, it's about other things as well that I eventually have to actually try to get published. But our technological devices are essentially not only are they in many ways substitutes for sex, and I don't just mean when someone looks up porn or something like that. I'm talking the short-term gratification they're getting from, let's just say, scrolling through their news feed. That is taking the place of sexual activity.
oh yeah.
And
It,
so, I can go on and on about this, but the point is, technology has cheapened the arts and it's cheapened society.
and it's cheapened cinema, the fact that we all have to
Yeah.
film on digital, which just does not look as good as celluloid. In my opinion, it just looks mostly like crap. A couple of people can make it look decent, but there's nothing like watching a film print, and there's nothing like watching film. And I guess if you brought up in this world where all you see is digital, you're going to think that's what you're familiar with. But I have to believe that the brain can tell you what's the more beautiful format or not. But let's talk about Body Heat a little bit more. Let's talk about the cast. There's also
Yes.
Richard Crenna in the cast, who is really good as Edmund Walker, Kathleen Turner's husband, who is
Yes.
kind of well, he pretty much is a bad guy in this movie. So do we mind so much that he gets taken out? I don't know that he deserved to be murdered, but it's interesting how the script goes out of its way to like paint him as somebody who quite possibly deserved to be murdered. But I do like the scene in the restaurant where William Hurt's character, Ned Racine, is hanging low because Richard Crenna is in town to be with his wife, and they run into each other at this restaurant. And then the three of them are sitting at the table, and Richard Crenna's character is talking about how people don't have their shit together these days. And if you're this guy who wants to take a shortcut like this guy he was dealing in business with, I don't know, I'm trying to remember the exact dialogue, but they're weak and they're useless and all of that. And then William Hurt goes, I know, I'm just like that. Like the dialogue, the way Lawrence Kasdan sets it up in the script, you'd think that confrontation with the three of them would have William Hurt's character on his back heels, but in a way he's like putting his finger into the flame.
Yes.
And Richard Crenna's character is like getting a vibe from this guy, like there's something with this guy, what's going, very subtly, what's going
Yes.
on. What's very interesting is, and I don't know if you're aware of this, the murder of Richard Crenna there was actually another scene where they did an aborted attempt at it, where William Hurt snuck into the house to murder Richard Crenna, and I believe the little girl was there. And so he had to call it off at the last moment. When they looked at it, Carol Littleton, the really good editor of this movie, she said, we don't need all this. And they combined the two nights into one. So you only see the night that Ned Racine murders him, although it was originally in the script intended to be a first attempt, and then it happened. And there is a continuity giveaway with the bed sheets. At one point, they change in the bedroom.
Yes.
If
And by
people
the
know about.
way, because you mentioned Carol Littleton, she's an amazing editor, not just in this movie, but in many other movies, including E.T.
Yeah.
I think her editing work in that movie is extraordinary. She should have won the Oscar that year for E.T.
I think she pretty much did all of Lawrence Kasdan's movies up until, I don't know if she did them all or she retired and maybe the last one or two or something, but I
Yeah,
think
she
she
even did. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention this when I was talking about Lawrence Kasdan, just in general at the beginning of this conversation, but I think his Wyatt Earp movie is very underrated, and she edited that.
Yeah. You know
Um,
what's interesting about Body Heat is that he particularly sought out a female editor for the film because I think he was worried about the male gaze even back then. And she really responded to the script. I can kind of see why even back then Lawrence Kasdan did that because so much of the film is the overpowering sexuality of Kathleen Turner's character, and I think he wanted the imprimatur of a woman's touch on this film. And it doesn't make it any less sexy.
no.
Body Heat is still super sexy, so who knows what even got toned down because whatever's left is enough, and Lawrence Kasdan wanted it. And it's something else that's interesting about this film is George Lucas was actually a producer on this film. And George Lucas was very active in getting the financing for Lawrence Kasdan, and even went as far as to tell Alan Ladd Jr. that if Kasdan went over budget, that they could use his producing fee to cover that. And I think the reason George Lucas did not want his name on the film is because he thought it would send the wrong message, not for George Lucas himself, but to the audience that Lawrence Kasdan was trying to target with this film, which is an adult film. He didn't want to create the impression that there was a George Lucas kind of family friendly vibe to the film, is what I understood. I mean, it could also be interpreted that George Lucas was worried about his family friendly brand, but either way, it worked out fine. And I actually think not having George Lucas's name in the credits probably did help this film and made it more Lawrence Kasdan's film.
That could have been the case. I mean, it's hard to know for sure, but it's a good theory.
Well, I think I've read both versions of that. And
No,
while
I
a lot
mean,
of,
no, what I meant was it would be hard to know, like, if George Lucas's name actually had been on the
oh,
film, would it have changed the way people perceive
well,
the film?
It's interesting because my favorite Jessica Lange movie is Frances, and it was produced by Mel Brooks, which was super out of character for
Well,
anything to do
yeah,
with
there
Mel.
you
He
go.
also did The Elephant Man, by the way.
And The Fly.
Yeah, so that definitely did raise an eyebrow when I saw Mel Brooks's credits in those movies.
I wonder if artists would even think about that today. I don't think so. Because we live in a very informal society today. You know what I mean? Like, I think today a producer would most likely keep their name on the movie no matter what. Like, they would never even think about, will this ruin someone's
Well,
interpretation or perception of the movie?
It's interesting because with Running Scared, Brett Ratner is a producer on the film, but he's a producer only in name. And I often wondered if people saw the credits and thought, is this very much like a Brett Ratner movie? Because Brett's sole involvement with the film was showing the script to this company, Media 8. And I had actually already been talking to the head of Media 8. I met him at a festival. His name was Mark Damon, and who was also an actor in many of these classic
Including
older.
The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yeah, yeah. And he was a very interesting guy. So we already, he asked me what, this was after the cooler, and he asked me what I wanted to do next. And I said, I have the script called Running Scared. And he said, show it to me. And then it just so happened that he was transitioning out of the company, but he did set it up there. And then he left. But Brett never even came to the set. And then I showed Brett one cut of it. He gave me his comments, and that was his entire involvement with it. So oftentimes you see a person's name on your film, and people think, wow, this person really had a big hand in the tone and creativity and looking at different performance takes and blah, blah, blah. But many times that is not the case, as was with Running Scared. So, but these credits are worked out contractually and people make their deals. So you never really know, as a producer yourself, what the involvement is with a producer in a movie. But even Running Scared didn't have that many producers compared to today. The average movie, independently put together movie, has like 50, 60 producers. In the case of Body Heat, I'd have to go back and look at the credits, but I bet you there's not more than two producers listed.
Yeah, and with the fall of the robust studio system, that's why you end up having more producers per film than used to be the case because resources and also money have to come from often many more sources instead of just
and
one or two.
and
So,
the actors are bringing in their
and
managers, or
that's
the
also
managers
happening.
are pushing themselves into the credits, and that never used to happen. And that becomes a deal breaker because you want the manager to give you access to the client. Well, then they have these relationships where they're going to get credits. And managers generally have nothing to do with the movie whatsoever. And they're given executive producer, co-producer, sometimes even full producer credits.
It's a very complicated system.
And then let's talk about Ted Danson in the movie. He was fantastic. I love Ted Danson, and Lawrence Kasdan gives him some of the best dialogue in the movie as well. And he
Yes.
plays the assistant DA who was actually scripted to dance, and then Ted Danson had to go and learn or get. He actually worked with a choreographer. He said in an interview on these dance scenes, and he would do it perfectly in a dance studio. And then he gets to the pier where he has that big dance scene that's right before the finale in Body Heat, and might be the last scene, if I'm not mistaken, with Ted Danson and William Hurt, not with Oscar, played by Jay Preston. But Ted Danson said when he got on the pier to do that dance, it was all slick with like fish grease or whatever it was, and he was slipping all over the place. He's terrific in it, as is J.A. Preston as Oscar, their cop friend who ends up having to take William Hurt's character in at the end. Just a fantastic cast. And what I love about it is Kasdan didn't go for movie stars. None of these, I don't think Ted Danson, I think he had maybe done The Onion Field, and that's it. There was definitely no cheers made at that point. All these actors, except for Richard Crenna. Probably Richard Crenna was the most well known in that entire cast at that
That's
point.
right.
William Hurt was just coming up. William Hurt was highly respected on Broadway, but I think very few of his movies had actually come out yet. And of course, this movie introduces in one of his first performances, if not his first performance, Mickey Rourke
Yes.
as Teddy Lewis, the bomb maker. And that's such a memorable performance. People who talk about Body Heat always talk about the Mickey Rourke cameo, so to speak.
He's great in it.
He's great, and it's so crazy to see young Mickey Rourke before his face got pounded in by
And his
boxing. And
voice changed.
yeah, yeah, I mean, that was the Mickey Rourke who went on to do Diner, and
That's
he had
right.
such a long run of great roles. Johnny Handsome, Angel Heart, just such an interesting actor. And it's so crazy the way this industry either corrupts you personally, where you get too much money, too much fame, you get these weird notions that you don't want to be a movie star overnight, you want to be a boxer. You go down to Mexico and somebody pounds your face in, and then you need plastic surgery to repair it, and then you're not the same again. I mean, there's just the craziest fucking world, and all the people who covered being in it, I'm not sure you want to. You have to have it in your DNA. You have to want to take this abuse before you can see any light, and you may never see any light, and you may never see justice of your talents in this business. Honestly, I'll contend that it's worse than ever because it's not really about talent and meritocracy anymore. It's purely about who knows who and who you are and what box you check. It's all so much bullshit today.
Yeah, well, I mean, the arts reflect the rest of society. So if society's not doing well, you're going to see evidence of that in the works of art that are being churned out. Because I think our politicians, for example, today are worse than they've ever been. I'm not talking about one or two exceptions. I'm talking in general. Politicians today in the Western world are the worst they've been since World War II.
Well,
When
they
when the
say
West
you,
when the West sorry, when the people fighting the bad guys were extraordinary, like FDR, Harry Truman, and Winston Churchill. Obviously, I wasn't referring to the Axis power leaders, right? So there you go.
well, I was just going to say, they say you get the politicians you deserve as voters. So I don't know what that says about us, but something fucked up is going on. I think across all parties, across
Yeah.
all generations, I don't know, there some kind of reckoning is due.
Well, we once had the Enlightenment, and now we have the age of stupidity. You know, that's one way of looking at it, you know.
Right. I
Right?
just
We used
wanted
to have the
to,
age of reason, and now we don't.
yeah, well, in an age of reason, there would be more body heats and
Yeah.
more basic instincts and fatal attractions. And I even like Indecent Proposal. I don't know why people crap all over that film. I thought it was a sexy film, and John Barry, just for the John Barry score,
Well,
you can
that's
go.
right. We used to have movies that, if nothing else, at least they were well scored, you know?
That's true. That's true. Honestly, I would go see any movie John Barry scored and I would never come away disappointed. And the bonus was I enjoyed a lot of those movies too.
That's right. Because the production values used to be higher in general.
That's true. That's
You
true.
could have, like, for example, how many movies that came out of Hollywood in the 20th century were aesthetically poor? Very few. Meaning, at the very least, whether you liked the movie or not, it looked high quality across the
Because
board.
also it took so much to get a movie made
That's right.
pre iPhones and video and all that. You really you had smart executives who understood how to get the most out of a script and had strong ideas, and you had strong producer types. Sometimes it took maybe too much credit for it, but guys like Robert Evans who could greenlight a script like Chinatown even if he knew he didn't really understand it.
Yeah.
You had really good producers in those days who understood the material and it wasn't checking boxes for them. And they weren't afraid to put their necks on the line and champion courageous movies, movies that were edgy, movies that were dark, movies that weren't going to have happy endings. How few movies do we get today where you have like a really dark ending? Only in the horror genre, I'll pretty much say the horror genre is the flip flop of everything else. You can't have a horror movie if the ending, everything seems resolved in the horror movie and then the creature or serial killer pops up again because you got to have a sequel. And it's sort of like it's not a satisfying ending unless the lead character gets killed in the last second or there's a resurrection of a greater evil or whatever the hell that is. But I don't know if complaining about it in this world or opining about it gets it done. I think we just have to find a way to bring better
Oh yeah,
movies
we
to
always have to find our
theaters.
yeah, we have to find our own way of getting things done, but it also doesn't hurt to make a record of criticisms that we have, because at the very least it could inspire other people to do things differently as well.
You know what's interesting though is if you watch the Criterion Closet on YouTube or wherever else you can watch it online, I guess on the Criterion site, they bring in all these celebrities or filmmakers or musicians into the Criterion Closet to pick their favorite movies from the Criterion collection. And they understand movies for the most part. They make smart choices. The actors are picking Cassavetes, or they're picking these filmmaker Fellini, or they're picking Body Heat, or they're picking movies that we talk about and respect. So they're not uneducated as to what these movies are. I just question where the disconnect is. It's like, okay, if you can enjoy and show enormous respect and you say, oh my God, this is the greatest movie ever made, and you pull out Body Heat or you pull out
Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes I can't tell if they actually believe these things they're saying or if they're just
no, but
parroting what they heard
I
other
know
people.
when they really do. For example, Noah Weil just did the Criterion Closet. I love it because he ransacked them. He must have taken like 20 titles, but he gave them their money's worth because each film he picked up, he could talk about it and he could talk about who he knew and who he was related to and how this plot happened and
Well,
how
that's
this.
good.
It's great. It's worth watching. And the other great one to watch is Natasha Lyonne, who goes in there and also ransacks the Criterion Closet with such humor and also knows these movies and in very little insightful commentaries. Those are the two I recommend. I just wanted to say that there's this great line from Body Heat that Kathleen Turner is so tired of having men ask her to say whether it would be, especially in the past, would it be at dinner parties or should meet people. All the men would say the line, please. And she wouldn't even have to ask what the line was. It was, you aren't too smart, are you? I like that in a man. And for some reason, men just seem to want to hear that coming from her lips. And I could understand why she was exhausted from it. So that's about it for Body Heat. I hope everybody seeks this film out if they haven't seen it or gets hold of the Criterion version to watch it again because it's still a great movie. It's so rewatchable. And they just haven't been performances like William Hurt's and Kathleen Turner's in an erotic thriller
Not in a
genre like
long
this.
time.
And I think it's an important movie.
It
And
is.
it's and it shows what the genre can be, and it's a smart movie. And I'd put Lawrence Kasdan's script before anything else in the movie, as much as all the craft is first class, including the John Barry score, which is first class John Barry. I don't think anyone who sees this movie is going to forget that score, and probably will rush to the internet to find out where you can buy it. And there was a complete edition released by Film Score Monthly a couple of years ago, and it may still be available. Highly recommend you go for that.
And check out Lawrence Kasdan's other films as well. I think he's a great, versatile writer-director.
Absolutely. So we'll be back next time with another Forbidden Films podcast.
We sure will.